I guess I should start at the beginning. I'm Camilla, and I was born to Jack and Lisa, my parents. Dad was always busy with his business stuff, and Mom was a teacher at the local elementary school. For the first 9 years of my life, things were pretty normal. We lived in a cozy house in the suburbs, had family dinners, went on vacations, the usual stuff. Dad was always working on some new business idea. He'd come home late, his head full of plans and dreams. Mom was the calm one, always there with a hug or a kind word. She'd help me with my homework, bake cookies with me on weekends, and tell me stories before bed. But then, when I was 9, everything fell apart. It was a regular Tuesday evening. I was in my room, playing with my dolls, when I heard shouting from downstairs. It wasn't the normal kind of arguing, this was different, scary. I crept down the stairs, my heart pounding. I saw Mom and Dad in the living room. Dad's face was red, and he was waving his arms around. Mom was crying, mascara running down her cheeks. "How could you, Lisa?" Dad yelled. "With Mark? My God, he's been to our house for dinner." Mom was sobbing now. "I'm sorry, Jack, it just happened. I didn't mean for it to." "Didn't mean for it to what? To destroy our family?" Dad's voice cracked. The next few weeks were a blur. There were hushed phone calls, meetings with people in suits, and a lot of crying, from both Mom and Dad. I didn't fully understand what was happening, but I knew it was bad. Then came the day Dad told me we were leaving. He knelt down in front of me, his eyes tired and sad. "Camilla, honey, you and I are going to be living somewhere else. We're leaving the house for your mom." "Why can't we stay here with Mom?" I asked, my lower lip trembling. Dad looked around the living room, his gaze lingering on the family photos. "It's complicated, sweetie. But we both love you very much. That will never change." As Dad and I drove away from our house, my stuffed animals and favorite books piled in the back seat, I felt like my whole world was crumbling. I didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning of a long, painful journey. Life with Dad turned out to be way different than I expected. At first, I thought we'd be struggling, But Dad's business suddenly took off. Before I knew it, we were moving into this huge house, even bigger than our old one. It was weird, living somewhere so fancy when I still felt so messed up inside. Dad was working all the time. He'd leave before I woke up and come home after I was in bed. A lot of days, I'd end up at Grandma and Grandpa's house, that's Robert and Eleanor, Dad's parents. "Camilla, honey, come help me with these cookies," Grandma would say, trying to keep me busy. Grandpa would take me out to the garden, teaching me the names of all the plants. They were nice and all, but it wasn't the same as having my parents around. When Dad was home, he was different. Stricter, I guess. "Camilla, have you done your homework?" he'd ask as soon as he walked in the door. Or, "Camilla, your room's a mess. Clean it up before dinner." It was like he was trying to be both Mom and Dad, and not really managing either. But I gotta give it to him, he was trying. Every Sunday became what he called Daddy-Daughter Day. We'd go out and do stuff together, just the two of us. Mini golf was his favorite, he'd get so into it, acting all goofy and competitive. "Watch out, Camilla. I'm going for a hole-in-one," he'd shout, making me laugh despite myself. Sometimes we'd go get ice cream. I'd always get the triple chocolate fudge, and he'd pretend to be grossed out. "How can you eat that sugar bomb?" he'd ask, while secretly stealing spoonfuls when he thought I wasn't looking. Other times, we'd hit up the local museum. Dad would read every single plaque out loud, putting on different voices for each one. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, he'd say in this ridiculous pirate voice, making me giggle and the other visitors stare. When I turned 10, Dad signed me up for piano lessons. I wasn't too thrilled about it at first, but it turned out to be pretty cool. Dad would come to every recital, sitting in the front row with this big, goofy grin on his face. Even when I messed up, which was a lot, he'd be the first one on his feet, clapping like I'd just won a Grammy or something. But even with all that good stuff, I couldn't help missing Mom. Some nights, when Dad was working late, I'd pull out our old family photo albums. There was Mom, smiling in every picture. I'd trace her face with my finger, trying to remember what her laugh sounded like, or the smell of her perfume. Once a month, like clockwork, I'd get to see Mom. These court-ordered visits became the highlight of my calendar, circled in red and counted down to with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The first time I saw her after the split, it was awkward as hell. We just stood there, staring at each other like strangers. Then Mom burst into tears and pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. After that, our visits became a whirlwind of activities and indulgence. It was like Mom was trying to cram a month's worth of mothering into a single day. She'd take me shopping, buying me clothes that made me feel grown up and cool. I remember trying on this crop top and thinking I was hot shit. "You look beautiful, sweetie," Mom gushed. When I wore it home, Dad nearly had a heart attack. "Absolutely not," he said, his face turning red. "Go change, now." I stomped up to my room, furious. "Mom lets me wear it," I muttered. "Well, I'm not your mother," Dad shot back. The next visit, Mom took me to this fancy cafe. The kind of place with tiny sandwiches and waiters in bow ties. "Order whatever you want, honey," Mom said with a wink. I went nuts. Chocolate cake, ice cream sundae, 3 different kinds of soda. By the end, I was so hyped up on sugar I was practically vibrating. Dad wasn't thrilled when I came home bouncing off the walls. "What did she feed you?" he grumbled, watching me zoom around the living room. But the best visit was when Mom surprised me with a trip to Adventureland, the local amusement park. We rode every roller coaster twice, screaming our heads off and laughing until our sides hurt. As we sat on a bench, sharing a massive cotton candy, Mom got this faraway look in her eyes. "Remember when we used to have family picnics in the backyard?" she said softly. "Your dad would burn the burgers, and we'd end up eating ice cream for dinner." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Those memories seemed like they belonged to someone else now. Mom squeezed my hand. "I miss those days, Camilla. I miss you. Maybe someday we could be a family again." My heart leapt at her words. "Really?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "We'll see, sweetie. We'll see." For weeks after, I'd daydream about moving back in with Mom, about our family being whole again. But then I'd look at Dad, see him trying so hard to make pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, and feel guilty for even thinking about leaving. Just before my 12th birthday, Mom dropped a bombshell. She was getting married to Mark. Yeah, that Mark, with whom she'd had an affair with. The wedding was like something out of a fairy tale. Mom looked stunning in her white gown, and Mark, well, he looked happy. I stood there in my frilly bridesmaid dress, watching them exchange vows, and felt torn in two. Part of me was happy for Mom. She was glowing, laughing in a way I hadn't seen in years. But another part of me couldn't help thinking about Dad, alone in our big empty house, probably buried in work or binge-watching some crappy TV show. After Mom and Mark's wedding, things started to change. Our visits took on a new flavor. Mark was always there now, hovering in the background like an eager puppy. He'd ruffle my hair and say stuff like, "I always dreamed of having a daughter just like you, Camilla." It was nice, I guess. Weird, but nice. And the way Mom would beam at him when he said it, like he'd just handed her the moon or something, well, that made me feel good too. Like maybe this whole messed up situation could work out after all. Mom started talking more and more about me living with them. She'd go on and on about this room they were planning for me. "It'll have a window seat, Camilla," she'd say, her eyes sparkling. "Just like you always wanted. And we can paint it any color you like." I'd nod and smile, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. It felt like betraying Dad to even think about it. Our shopping sprees became less frequent. Instead, we'd have these big family dinners at their place. Mark would cook. He wasn't half bad, actually, and then regale us with stories about his work. Mom would hang on his every word, and I'd sit there, pushing food around my plate, feeling like a third wheel in my own family. When I turned 14, everything kicked into high gear. Mom started calling me every week, sometimes more. She'd show up at my school events unannounced, bringing me flowers or taking me out for ice cream after. "You know, Camilla," she'd say, stirring her coffee, "you're old enough now to decide where you want to live. The courts would listen to you." I'd freeze up every time she brought it up. Part of me wanted to jump at the chance, to go back to the way things were before. But another part wasn't so sure anymore. One day, she showed up at my debate club meeting. I was in the middle of arguing about climate change when I saw her slip into the back of the room. After it was over, she rushed up to me, beaming. "Oh, Camilla, you were wonderful," she gushed. "You know, if you lived with us, you could join the debate team at your new school. They're state champions." I felt my stomach clench. "Mom, just think about it, okay," she said, squeezing my arm. "We want you home with us." As I watched her leave, I felt torn in two. Home. What did that even mean anymore? That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I thought about Mom and her new perfect life with Mark. I thought about Dad, working himself to the bone to give me everything I needed. I was 14 years old, and the weight of the world felt like it was on my shoulders. How was I supposed to choose? How could I possibly make a decision that wouldn't hurt someone I loved? My 15th birthday was coming up, and instead of being excited, I was dreading it. Mom and Dad were at each other's throats about who would host my party. It all came to a head at this family dinner at Dad's place. "She's been living with me for years, Lisa," Dad growled, stabbing his fork into his steak. "Of course I'm hosting her party." Mom's eyes flashed. "She's my daughter too, Jack. I have a right to celebrate her birthday." I just sat there, pushing my peas around my plate, wishing I could disappear. Then Mom dropped the bomb. "Camilla," she said, her voice suddenly soft, "you're old enough now to decide where you want to live. Who do you choose?" The room went dead silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, Mom's hopeful, Dad's hurt, Mark's expectant. My throat closed up. I couldn't breathe. "I want to live with Mom," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The look on Dad's face. God, I'll never forget it. It was like I'd reached into his chest and ripped out his heart. He just crumpled. Before I knew it, I was packing my bags. Mom and Mark were over the moon, helping me move my stuff into their place. Dad just stood in the doorway, watching, his eyes hollow. "You can come back anytime, pumpkin," he said as I left. Anytime. The first few weeks at Mom and Mark's were like a dream. They took me shopping for my new room, letting me pick out this super expensive, trendy bedroom set. They enrolled me in this fancy private school, Westfield Academy. "You'll get a top-notch education here," Mom gushed. "This is the start of a bright future, Camilla." And the family game nights? They were a blast. We'd play Monopoly or Catan, laughing and trash-talking each other. For a while, I thought I'd made the right choice. But then, things started to change. It started small. Mom making comments about my clothes or my hair. "Honey, are you sure you want to wear that? It's not very flattering." Or, "Mark's niece always looks so put together. Maybe you could try styling your hair like hers?" Then it was my grades. I was struggling to keep up at Westfield. It was way harder than my old school. "A B-, Camilla?" Mom frowned, looking at my report card. "Mark's niece is top of her class. Maybe you're not applying yourself enough." The game nights became less frequent. More and more often, I'd come home to find a note on the fridge, "Gone out with the Petersons." Leftovers in the fridge. "Don't wait up." I'd heat up my dinner and eat alone in my room, staring at the fancy decor that suddenly felt cold and impersonal. The final straw was the vacation. They'd been promising me this amazing trip to Hawaii for months. I was so excited, counting down the days. Then, 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave, Mark sat me down. "Listen, kiddo," he said, not quite meeting my eyes, "we're going to have to postpone the trip. Just some financial stuff we need to sort out. You understand, right?" I nodded, forcing a smile. But inside, I felt something crack. That night, I lay in my fancy new bed, in my fancy new room, in this house that was supposed to be my home, and I cried. I cried for the life I'd left behind, for the dad who was probably sitting alone in his big empty house, for the little girl who thought she could have it all. The days leading up to the final custody hearing were tense. Mom was all smiles and reassurances, but I could feel the undercurrent of anxiety in the house. It was like walking on eggshells, everyone trying to pretend everything was perfect. I couldn't sleep. The pressure of the upcoming hearing, the growing unease I felt in this house, it all swirled in my head, keeping me awake night after night. It was about a week before the hearing when it happened. I woke up in the middle of the night, my throat dry as sandpaper. Figuring everyone was asleep, I crept downstairs for a glass of water. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Mom and Mark, having what sounded like a heated discussion. I froze, not wanting to interrupt. That's when I heard it. "I'm tired of pretending that I like having her here," Mark's voice, harsh and annoyed. "The kid is constantly draining our resources." My heart stopped. I pressed myself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. I know, Mom replied, her voice low and urgent. "But think about the tax breaks and the alimony. Once we have full custody, we'll have a steady income stream from Jack." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Mom was using me for money? Mark's voice again, skeptical. "I hope it's worth it. I didn't sign up to be a full-time dad to a teenager." "Just a little longer," Mom said, her voice soothing now. "Once she's officially ours, we can start setting some stricter rules. Maybe even send her to boarding school." I didn't wait to hear more. I bolted back upstairs, my need for water forgotten. I dove under my covers, shaking, tears streaming down my face. It had all been a lie. The shopping trips, the fancy school, the family game nights, it was all just a show. They didn't want me. They wanted Dad's money. I barely slept that night, replaying their words over and over in my head. When morning came, I dragged myself downstairs, feeling like a zombie. "Morning, sweetie," Mom chirped, way too cheerful. "Ready for breakfast?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I poked at my cereal, my stomach churning. "Everything okay, Camilla?" Mark asked, peering at me over his newspaper. "You look a little pale." I forced a smile. "Just nervous about a test," I lied. They exchanged a look. "Well, don't stress too much," Mom said, patting my hand. "I'm sure you'll do great." I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table, to tell them I knew everything, to demand how they could do this to me. But I didn't. I just sat there, nodding and smiling, playing the part of the perfect daughter. As soon as breakfast was over, I retreated to my room. I sat on my bed, staring at the fancy decor that now felt like a prison. What was I going to do? The hearing was in a week. If I didn't say anything, I'd be trapped here, with people who saw me as nothing more than a paycheck. The day of the custody hearing arrived like a thunderclap. The courtroom was packed. Mom and Mark sat on one side, both looking confident and put together. On the other side was Dad, with Grandma and Grandpa right behind him. Dad looked tired, resigned, like he'd already accepted defeat. As the lawyers droned on, presenting their arguments, I sat there in silence, my hands clenched so tight my knuckles were white. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me, their expectations pressing down like a physical thing. Finally, the moment came. The judge, a stern-looking woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, turned to me. "Camilla," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle, You're old enough now that your opinion matters in this decision. Who do you want to live with? The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. I could feel Mom's triumphant smile, could practically taste her victory. Dad just looked broken. Like he was bracing for the final blow. I stood up, my legs shaking so bad I thought I might fall over. I took a deep breath, and then, I want to live with my father, I said, my voice trembling but growing stronger with each word. And, I don't want to see my mother anymore. The shock in the room was electric. Mom's smile vanished, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. Mark's face went pale. Dad looked like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. The judge leaned forward, her brow furrowed. Camilla, that's a very serious statement. Can you tell us why? I nodded, swallowing hard. A week ago, I overheard a conversation between my mother and Mark. They said they were only fighting for custody because of the money. The alimony, the tax breaks. They talked about sending me to boarding school once they had custody. They don't really want me. As I spoke, I could see the color draining from Mom's face. Mark couldn't even look at me, his eyes fixed on the floor. That's not true, Mom burst out, her voice shrill. Camilla, honey, you must have misunderstood. Mrs. Parker, please, the judge cut her off sharply. She turned back to me, her eyes kind but probing. Camilla, are you absolutely sure about what you heard? I nodded, feeling tears start to well up in my eyes. Yes, Your Honor, I'm sure. The judge nodded slowly, then turned to address the courtroom. In light of this new information, we'll need to take a brief recess. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. As everyone started to file out, I finally dared to look at Dad. He was staring at me, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and something else. Hope, maybe? I wanted to run to him, to throw my arms around him and beg for forgiveness. But before I could move, a court officer was ushering me out of the room. The next 30 minutes felt like an eternity, but finally, we were called back into the courtroom. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The judge cleared her throat, and the room fell silent. In light of the new information provided by Camilla, and after careful consideration of all factors involved, I've reached a decision. Custody is awarded to the father, Jack Thompson. Furthermore, Lisa Parker will be required to pay child support. The relief that flooded through me was overwhelming. I looked at Dad, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw him smile, really smile. As we left the courthouse, Mom grabbed my arm. Her face was twisted with anger and hurt. I never loved you anyway, she hissed. You're just as stupid as your father. Her words stung, but as I watched her storm off with Mark, I realized something. I was free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, the constant feeling of not being good enough. The next few years were, well, they weren't easy, but they were healing. Dad and I started going to family therapy together. At first, it was awkward and painful, dredging up all the hurt and misunderstandings between us. But slowly, session by session, we started to rebuild our relationship. We learned to communicate, to understand each other. Our bond grew stronger than I ever thought possible. Grandma and Grandpa became my rocks. They were always there with a warm hug, a home-cooked meal, or just a listening ear when I needed to talk. Their unwavering support helped me believe in family again. I threw myself into school and extracurriculars. I joined the debate team on a whim and discovered I had a knack for public speaking. Standing at the podium, articulating my thoughts, I felt powerful in a way I never had before. It was like I'd finally found my voice. On my 18th birthday, Dad surprised me with a gift that brought me to tears. It was a scrapbook, filled with photos and mementos from my childhood. There were pictures I thought were lost in the divorce, Mom and Dad and me at the beach, my first day of kindergarten, Christmases, and birthdays and ordinary days that suddenly seemed precious. Now, at 20, I'm in college studying psychology. My experiences inspired me to want to help other kids going through divorce. I want them to know they're not alone, that it's not their fault, that they can survive and even thrive. I still have scars from what happened. There are days when the pain of mom's betrayal feels fresh, when I wonder how she could have used me like that. But I'm learning to use that pain as fuel, to turn it into something positive. I've started speaking at conferences about children's rights in divorce proceedings. I tell my story, hoping it will make a difference. Maybe if one judge, one lawyer, one parent hears it and thinks twice about using a child as a pawn, it will all be worth it. Dad comes to every one of my speaking engagements. He sits in the front row, beaming with pride. Sometimes I catch him wiping away a tear when I talk about how far we've come. As for Mom, I haven't spoken to her since that day at the courthouse. Sometimes I think about reaching out, but I'm not ready. Maybe someday, but not yet. For now, I'm focused on healing, on building a future, on becoming the person I want to be. Life isn't perfect. I still have trust issues, still struggle with self-doubt sometimes. But I'm learning, growing, healing. And I'm surrounded by people who love me for who I am, not what I can do for them.